Hello and welcome to the Nintendo Switch Online Game Club, the show where we play through the games available on Nintendo's various NSO apps completely at random. I'm your host, Derrick Bittner, and in this episode I'm joined once again by Daniel Alba and, for the first time, Brandon Miracle, the other half of Good Vibes Arcade and one of the best editors you could ever hope to find.
Oh, you're going to make me cry.
Good to have you back, Daniel. And Brandon, how you feeling?
I'm feeling jazzed and ready to dive into this.
Yep. And as you're likely aware, there are now over 200 games across the NSO, and while some are widely known like Super Mario Bros. And Zelda, there are some odd picks that could be considered hidden gems. We honestly don't know. So, what we do each week is enter all those games into a randomizer, pick one, and then give our initial thoughts. So, this week, the randomizer, as if you didn't see the end of last episode, chose Xevious for the NES. What do we know about Xevious?
Well, funnily enough, I think Daniel and I know a little bit about Xevious, and in the same way.
That's amazing.
As expected, Brandon and I probably have experienced this from the same source. Would you like to explain where we have experienced this one, Brandon?
So, Xevious is an unlockable in Star Fox Assault on the GameCube, and that was the first time I had ever heard of Xevious or played it, was in Star Fox Assault.
Yeah, because it was co-developed by Namco. Yeah, so they threw that in. If you collect all the silver medals in the game, it unlocks Xevious as your bonus, and it's just a straight up port of Xevious. Apparently, I don't know, like a prequel to Star Fox, apparently. But yeah, we both experienced it that same exact way. And you know, it's funny to come back to it like this because I never actually played it on a proper emulator or not in the context of Star Fox. So it's pretty funny that we got this now.
I mean, it's an NES game. I assume it's 2D, but I can't imagine it's too fun to play with either the GameCube's analog stick or the D-pad. So at least you'll have better control this time around.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It's a top-down shmup, because you're not only shooting ahead of you, you can drop bombs down below to the surface.
Oh, it's one of those, so it's sort of like UN Squadron, because I'll say it right now, I've heard of Xevious, I know nothing about Xevious. Bullet hells are a huge gap for me, because I think I tried a few with friends, and every time I just die so quickly, I'm like, no, this is not for me. I don't like this. So this will be interesting. I've slowly tried to dip my feet into the idea, but we'll see how that actually turns out with this because, we have one that I'm guessing we're going from bottom to top, kind of like, I guess, Galaga, but, scrolling.
Yeah, pretty much. I was reminded also in chat that this was one of the games for the 3DS that had the 3D Classics line. Xevious was a part of that, and it does benefit from the depth of field with, you drop the bombs down on enemies below. And it's an interesting title, that's for sure. I'm more familiar with games like Galaga, as you mentioned beforehand, but Xevious, it also helped. Also was in that era and helped to create a little bit of the shmup era as well, and what they would become later on.
The last time I played it probably was on Star Fox Assault, and if I remember right, it's a relatively slow-paced, not super heavy fire kind of shmup.
Oh, okay.
So I wouldn't even consider it a bullet hell. It's more of a bullet light.
Oh yeah.
Bullet
it's
heaven.
Very gradual movement, at least as far as the beginning stages go. I don't know about later on, but yeah, it is pretty accessible in that sense.
Yeah.
If we're gonna have to do, because I know there's a few bullet hells on here, so if we have to ease myself into it, this is probably the best way to do it.
Honestly, yes.
Did you guys bother beating it? Because the unlockable NES game that I remember from my childhood, at least with the GameCube, was unlocking the original Metroid in Metroid Prime. And I remember playing it for 10 minutes and be like, I'm lost and I do not like the upgrade system for this. It controls terribly. Turning it off and never return to it. So Yeah.
I played it enough to like have a distinct enough memory of it, but no, I never. Excuse me, I never beat it because NES games are hard.
It is a difficult game, and like you're playing it without the added accessibility options like rewind or save states now. So you're playing like the core experience of the NES there, and it's a challenging game for sure. So maybe now we'll actually beat it.
Yeah. What I'll likely do is I'll treat this as much as close to the original experience as possible until reaching to a certain point. I'm like, okay, let's actually get through this and see what it all has to offer. I think that's probably the best way to approach it, just to get that feeling.
Yeah, you want to at least get a general idea of what it was like to play it before we had that kind of accessibility and support. I do remember being able to at least beat the first couple levels without too much struggle, but I can only remember like one level background, so that probably tells you a lot.
Oh yeah, just like the grassy plains with the mountains area.
Oh,
That's
boy.
You
pretty much
eventually
all
end up over water, and that's
Yeah.
all.
Is I guess a big determining factor for this is this unlimited continues or limited continues. I'm gonna guess limited.
I'm pretty sure I game overed, so it should be limited.
I think it's limited. Yeah, or
Oh,
else
boy.
I feel like I would have been that kind of person to just kind of power through it and to see what the end is if it was unlimited. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I gamed over it as well. So
All right. Well, unless we have any other preconceptions on Xevious, I guess we could just break and get right to it and see what we come back with and see how we feel about this game.
My only other comment is that I liked Star Fox Assault more.
I've not played
My-
Star Fox Assault, so yeah, I got nothing.
My other comment is that this is the Namco game that introduced an enemy called the Bakura, which is like a spinning tile, and they sometimes have that as a joke enemy in Tales games. Like I know that you can fight the Bakura in Tales of Symphonia, and I thought that was really funny because whenever you get too close to it, it just slaps you in the face and knocks you back.
That's amazing.
Oh,
Well,
Namco.
we will see how it all turns out when we return in a week with our thoughts on Xevious. So see you soon.
Many thousands of years ago, there was a technologically advanced civilization that lived here on Earth, the Xevious. Their powerful computers made a terrible prediction. An ice age was about to descend that would be so extreme that human life could not survive. And so the entire population left the Earth in their spacecraft to seek a new home in deep space. But now, the Xevious have come back to reclaim the planet in a totally compelling video game experience from Atari.
And we're back after a week of playing Xevious. That certainly was something. It was my first time playing the game, but both of you had experience with the version included in Star Fox Assault. So after coming back to it after all these years, what'd you think? Let's start with you, Bradon. How do you feel about Xevious after this week?
I'll say it. I'll put it this way: Xevious is as good as I remember it.
That's a good way to put it. What about you, Daniel? Which are just impressions right off the bat?
Xevious is a game. All right, roll the credits, Derrick. Roll them. We're done. No, Xevious was pretty much, yeah, as I remembered it. It was a little bit easier, thankfully, because we had NSO features to kind of help us for the way we played it. But when you just jump into it with no context, with no background, with nothing, it really is just like, you're scrolling shoot 'em up game that it existed way back in the early 80s. And if you're looking for deep, compelling gameplay, you might not find it here.
No, you definitely will not. But that's the thing. You have to go into this with context. You can't, because if you go into it blind, which I did looked up nothing when I started this. You have no idea. It is basic as all get out and seems remarkably hard. Like, man, I'm having a hard time getting anywhere. So let me use the rewind feature to see how far I get, not realizing this game has no end. for whatever reason, I think I read
yeah.
somewhere that it actually has a story. So I'm like, oh, it must have an end in that case. That's kind of cool. That's different. That's no wonder it's, such a big hallmark. No, there are 16 areas. Good luck telling the difference between the two between any of them, and dotted by boss fights, which is unique. Boss fights were not a thing before this game. That's one of its big innovations, and that's the thing. In context, in 1982, when this released in arcades, makes complete sense why this blew minds. The fact that it was scrolling and not just a single screen like Galaga. The fact that it had boss enemies. The fact that, there's all these different patterns and ways of playing it. That would definitely be like, oh my gosh, this is crazy. This is amazing. I think even like the air and land differences like of fighting in that way. I think that's probably unique as well. But coming back to it in the year 2023, boy, this is basic as hell.
Yeah.
This is like milk toast, the oatmeal of shoot 'em ups. Like its bland design is almost like to its advantage in that 1982 lens, because like it does have those 16 areas and they do loop, but they're all so generic looking. Like none of us could tell probably when
I couldn't
it
tell you
restarted.
when one area ended. I have to assume it's just because of when we hit a boss.
I could tell where.
Was it my suspicion was that it was when the you'd fly over forests and there'd be like a break there, because that's where you'd restart when you die.
Yes.
Oh.
That is exactly where they started.
I had no idea. I just assumed like, it's just another forest.
But because everything looks so generic, like it fools the mind. You can just kind of keep playing forever if you want to. Yeah, I would suggest it. Even the music, like, is so horribly grating because it doesn't change at all.
You got tired of that after just 5 seconds?
Yeah, a little bit.
So, I guess people in chat are asking for the lore. Why do they shoot? The original Xevious scenario actually revolved around the Vietnam War, where you played as a helicopter, shooting other aircrafts and dropping bombs. Back then, it was going to be called Cheyenne, likely referencing the kind of helicopter they used during said war. But unfortunately, between the time of the original conceptualization and getting it into its production, some of the developers got reshuffled around, leaving the producer, Masanobu Endo, to be the designer, the artist, and the programmer. So the story was supposed to consist of like an ancient civilization that had come back to wage war on Earth. And these ships are meant to look super like exotic and weird. They named them with a bunch of like nonsensical words and names that are just totally made up. Xevious was actually supposed to be spelled with a Z, but they made it an X instead to make it look more exotic and weird and all that. And it was, as you mentioned, the first game to feature changing environments instead of like an infinitely scrolling outer space background, like for Galaga or Galaxian, for example, because it had rivers, forests, it had the Peruvian Nazca lines. Like for some reason, they added that there to give it a more of that alien feel. But yeah, there's like 16 stages, and they're just seamlessly divided by these forests, which it kind of all blends together, so you never really can tell that you're starting one stage to the next. And so I imagine some of us kind of played the game to its completion and then just played it again without even realizing it.
Yo.
Yeah.
Yep, I sure did.
I think everybody's like marveling about Daniel having that all these factoids, and like, we need to do this. Otherwise, there's very little to talk about here, because this is a basic ass game. Like, I have some factoids for you too, because this game was a massive hit and the first killer app of the Famicom in Japan, because it was released on the Famicom in 1984. It was one of the first third-party titles, and it sold out within 3 days. It also apparently flooded the Namco's telephone lines with players asking for gameplay tips, which, good luck.
Yeah.
But it was not released in the United States until 1987. I think it was 1980s. Maybe a little later. I'm not sure. I can't find the exact year of when it was released in the States. No, the arcade was released in 1983. I don't know about the NES version. I can't find that exactly.
A lot of US NES releases their dates are lost to time, actually. It's kind of weird.
I think the big takeaway here is by the time it released in the States, it was old hat. Other shooters had come and obviously had power-ups and all these different elements to it that made them just much more advanced than what Xevious put there. Xevious is the forebearer. It established a lot of stuff, and it was extremely popular to the point that I believe it sold 1.5 million copies worldwide on the NES, and 1.25 million of those were from Japan. Like, it was just a massive hit in Japan. It just blows your mind in that way that this game could be that popular, but it was, because it was unique and special in that way. And I can see people being at home just trying to get better at their scores, because it is that type of game. It's all about just trying to get that better high score and compete in that way. That's the only entertainment you're going to get from this thing, though.
I imagine its sales may also be just because that would have probably been fairly young in terms of arcade games getting console ports, and console ports that are relatively quality. We just watched a video before this of the arcade version of Xevious, and I was surprised at just how much it just looks like the NES game, because back then you expected a console port of an arcade game to be quite a visual downgrade, but it's really not in this case.
Not really. It looks pretty similar, all things considered. So I couldn't tell you how many areas I went through, because, I tried like 4 or 5 attempts, and I kept it in mind because I knew I would botch the actual best score, because everybody was curious about what our scores would be for this. And I think it was like 32,000 was my best score before I attempted this. Yeah. After doing the whole rewind thing, I've never used that rewind function so much in a NSO game. Like, I had to constantly do it to beat some of these things, because people were saying, oh, it's not a bullet hell. This game, if you get far enough, is a complete bullet hell. My God.
I had never gotten that far, like, on the Star Fox port of the game. So, because in the preview for this, I mentioned that I didn't think it was a bullet hell because I'd never experienced that. But you're right. When you get farther, it gets real bad. I was surprised at like how often I actually needed to rewind. The first 5-ish minutes were fine. After that, it was a nightmare.
Mm-hmm.
That just shows how good you are, because the more aggressive you play, the more the game will respond to that and attack back aggressively in turn. The AI will read how well you're doing, and if you're defeating a certain enemy type very consistently, a more advanced version will come out and replace it. And if you remember, there's like these orbs on the ground that have these red lines glowing out of them. Mm-hmm. If you bomb those, if you bomb enough of those, the game will revert those enemies back to the easier ones. And so after the 16th stage, after the 16th stage, the game itself will just kind of start over again with that higher difficulty already set in. But there's actually some layers to this. It's not just like there's some thought and put into it in both gameplay and
that
things.
Because I noticed like new enemy types showing up out of nowhere. They're just like filling the screen more. I'm like, what the hell are these all of a sudden? And then they stopped, and I'm like, oh. After I earned myself an extra life and then died. And then it reset and didn't show up again. I'm like, oh, okay, that's interesting.
Yeah. It scales to the player's skill, depending on how well or how not well you're playing.
My mind is now forever linked Xevious to Resident Evil 4 because of this information.
Well, there you go. I mean, as far as the gameplay itself, the enemy units stand out. Those boss areas definitely. There's a reason Pac-Man's holding it up. You really don't forget those designs. But was it just me, or was it a pain in the ass to hit stuff on the ground?
Oh yeah, because you're scrolling. It's scrolling while you're aiming, and when you shoot, it doesn't necessarily scroll with it. It'll just hit where you have to kind of anticipate where it's going to end up, and that's really hard to do when you have 10 things shooting at you at the same time on all directions.
Yeah, it kind of felt like shooting the ground once the difficulty started ramping up was a little counterintuitive. Because you can't shoot and drop a bomb at the same time, can you?
Yes, I actually figured that out. It's like I eventually found out I could just hold down both buttons and kind of make it work.
Okay.
So, because I was for a while there, I was only shooting and then only bombing, but no, I was like, wait a second, let me try this, and it worked. So. I wouldn't say it's like consistent. The problem is the bombs are just nowhere as fast as the guns, and so that throws you off as far as the speeds.
also not being able to alter the trajectory or where you're actually aiming the bomb at all, because the ship always faces forward. If there was, I know this is 1982, but like if there was some way to change the direction of the ship, like, you know, asteroids or whatever, I think that would have vastly improved the gameplay experience. It would have at least been more engaging.
Yeah, that's for sure. Because you really only have like shoot forward in this distance, and you can't even control like how far or short to shoot it or to lob it. It's always that set distance, and it makes it a bit difficult when the formations start really piling up later on.
Mm-hmm. Another thing I noticed is you can't travel the entire length of this length of the screen. The top like quarter, there's an invisible wall there, and I would try to go up that way to dodge bullets, and all of a sudden wall, and well, I'm dead. So
you think the vertical distance of an arcade game would encourage you to explore the entire area more often, but it kind of discourages you, I guess, because it's kind of so that ships won't unfairly just hit you coming down too quickly. But at the same time, it's like, I can adapt. Trust in me, game. I can do this.
You're killing me more often than anything else, because I can't escape. I need to dodge these bullets because, my God, you put out so many at certain points. And they just seem random. There just doesn't seem like a way to, like, oh, I can squeeze through here or something, or find out some way to get through that. It's just, yeah, just there it is.
Did you guys have like the round balls? I don't know if they were bombs or whatever that would come down from the top of the screen and then explode into a full circle of bullets.
Yep.
And then there would be like homing bullets that would whip around you.
Yeah.
I thought those were pretty cool for an NES game. The whipping around you was pretty neat. But man, those are hard to dodge when they come so fast and you are so slow. If you're on the same side of the screen as where that ball's going to drop, you're probably just dead.
Probably. Azran in the chat figured out that apparently you can shoot the cannonball to prevent the radial explosion, but the thing is, you're either there or you're not. If you're in front of it, great, you can take care of it. But if you're not, this ship moves so slow, you're not going to get over there in time in order to take care of it. That, oh boy, that frustrated me a few times where I just could not get where I needed to.
I don't know if you guys encountered this, but there's like this diamond thing that comes down and surrounds you for a little bit. Like, it splits in half. One half goes to your left, the other half goes to your right.
What is that? It doesn't.
I never figured out what that was. Yeah, it happened to me a few times.
Yeah, I thought I was trying to figure it out while I was playing the game, but I couldn't like find out what exactly it was contributing to the game, if anything, because it just kind of fused together and then went away.
Yeah.
At first I was like, oh, cool, a power up, but no, it's I don't know. I still don't know.
I don't think anybody knows. It just, I'm scanning the wiki gameplay section, and nope, nobody mentions anything about that.
Sorry, I failed you all on knowing the lore of the diamond here.
Yeah. Now, I did not. I know they're in here, but I never found one of my own. But apparently, you can shoot certain places, and you'll find the special flags from the NCO, which actually were put in there because the developer, I think this was the second game to have it, and it's only because Endo was a fan of Rally X. It's like, I want that in here too, and I think it just became the trend.
This is where that started the trend. Sometimes when you drop bombs in certain areas, you'll see like these hidden towers will show up every now and then. There's no real indication of where they are, but sometimes you'll shoot them and you'll find the S flag. One time it was in the water, like you shoot it, and then the S flag would just pop out of the water, and just like, okay. Sometimes it gives you points, sometimes it's a life. But they're just kind of hidden around. A lot of weird little mechanics that they added in this game, honestly.
Yeah. I did try to check out the 2-player mode just out of curiosity and see what type of 2-player it was, hoping that it might be 2 ships at once. No, it's take your turns.
That kind of sucks.
Yeah.
I mean, it's cool for back then, to play the game and I guess compete for high scores or whatever.
Yeah.
Pretty much, yeah. How did you guys do score wise? Did you keep it in mind or forget?
So my first, I did 2 runs, 2 separate runs. My first run, I just rewinded the whole time, just trying to see how far I could get, what would change. The second time, I just did a straight run, just as far as I could get. And I think it was 35,540 was my end score.
That's better than mine. I think 34, I think, is the closest I got to that.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I did it just, I did pretty much the same thing. I did a run where it was just without it, and then with just rewinding the whole way. I think mine was like 55,000
Oh, wow.
something.
Holy
Just
crap,
'cause
Dang, Daniel.
I remember I like these shooters. Honestly, they're kind of not my thing, but I have fun with them, and it's back to me playing Galaga so much. Probably I play that a lot of the time. Just have that brain for it, maybe.
The core gameplay loop isn't bad. Like,
No.
it is.
Mhm.
It's mechanically sound. I think what drags it down is the monotonous music, the non-changing backgrounds. But like the
They're always
the whole
changing.
AI explanation you gave, that's really interesting, and that makes a
Yeah.
game like that more fun to play. But if there was just a little bit of variance from a visual standpoint, I think it would not be so grating to play today.
Yeah, I think that's really the killer here, is that there's just nothing to really denote different areas like that clearly, and it just becomes very monotonous very quickly. You're getting the same types of enemies for the most part. You'll see a few new things, as we've mentioned, but other than those, you'll see every enemy usually by the time you reach that first boss, and then it's just like how well you can do. And I can see yourself. There was value in that back in the day, where you didn't have to pump in quarters in order to do these score attacks. And I could see kids being like, "Oh, I got this score in Xevious, and what'd you get?" and kind of have that competition. But nowadays, I mean, even as a kid, I did not care about points. And this makes
Yeah.
it makes it just a curiosity.
It was just such a different era back then with that whole like, oh, we gotta pump those quarters in and get those high scores. But now it's just like I just play it to play it.
There's not much to, like, it's different in the arcades where you can see your name at the top of a leaderboard on a specific machine. But when you're at home and it's just you and your sibling, or even just you, and it's just like 10 of your own name, it's just like, who cares, man?
I mean, even when you restart it, it's not like the scores are cleared.
Right.
Like it never holds it, so you don't even get that permanent aspect of it. So, yeah. I mean,
for as bland as we say it is, for the time there is a great amount of enemy variety for a shooter like this. They keep on changing, and as mentioned, if you defeat a certain type enough times, it'll just have an advanced version of it come at you. And I think that was really cool for back then, especially when you play games like, again, Galaga. There's like only 3 enemy ship types, the enemies that you fight, the same formation every time. So at least it kept it varied in that way.
You can fight circles. You can fight squares.
you can fight hexagons.
You can
and
fight
octagons.
Hexagons of death.
Yes. You can have those little squares that rotate towards you. That have just there's your variety. Is dodge the maze of squares, rotating squares.
Oh,
My
gosh.
headcanon now is that those rotating squares are the blocks that Andros would throw at you on
Oh, yeah.
Star
The
Fox on
Bakura.
Super Nintendo. Yeah.
Bakura. The Bakura, I remember I mentioned it earlier with the other part of this discussion, but the Bakura has kind of shown up in different games related to Namco in the future, like the Tales series. And I didn't realize this until looking up some of the enemy names. So the ring enemy that you fight, the first thing that you fight, pretty much, that comes down and leaves again, they're called the Toroid. And I didn't know this, but in Tales of Symphonia, you get a weapon for Colette that's a Toroid. They're 2 Toroids.
That's cool.
Exact,
Okay.
the same name, because they're rings. She fights with rings, and I was like,
Right.
oh my god, I never knew this before. That's awesome.
That's kind of amazing. It's the legacy. Like, okay, there's not much more you can get out of this, but hey, there's some cool visual cues that we can do to call back to it, because it's an important game history wise. There's no doubt about that. It is absolutely necessary to the history of the shoot 'em up genre. But is it worth playing? Well, do we have anything else we want to say about Xevious before we give our final verdict?
It's like Daniel said, it's a game.
No, I appreciate it for what it did and it took a lot of references from other like really popular culture and media during that time. Like the Sovalu, your ship is inspired from the Nostromo strip from Alien. There's Battlestar Galactica references. There's a ship that looks like the Millennium Falcon. The Bakura itself is based on the monolith from 2001: Space Odyssey. The references are crazy in this game. That's what that was based off of. So I mean, they did some research and they took some inspiration and they made something. They tried to put as much lore as they could into an arcade shooter, but you know, this day and age, it's just like, well, that was a game.
What about you? Well, you already said it. So yeah. Well, with all that said, would you recommend it as an NESO or tell people to stay away with an NO? Brandon?
I want to be respectful to this game, but I think it's going to be a no from me, boss.
What about you, Daniel?
Because I'm a fan of what this game did at the time. You know, I respect it, as Brandon said. But if you want to find something that's, you know, deep and compelling to get yourself into, I would say an no for Xevious. I'm sorry.
That's 3 for 3. No for me because, yeah, I respect its history, undoubtedly. Like, I learned some things here about this game, but it's not worth playing nowadays. Like, it is a curiosity at best. You boot it up, you see the history, like, that was a thing, and you move on. There is no reason to spend more than 10 minutes on this, unless you and your friend get really into competing with those scores. But yeah,
find someone who's made a video essay on the history, and that you'll probably get more value out of that than playing the game itself.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Without a doubt.
I don't know, man. If it was like 30 years ago, I might be saying NES. Oh, but today, and you know how it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, what about all of you? Have you played Xevious before, or was this your first time? Let us know in the comments, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider supporting us at patreon.com/gvgaming, which includes our audience, live audience tier that will allow you to watch the Game Club live as it's being recorded, like all of our fine patrons here. But even just subscribing and hitting that bell helps us a ton. But now it's time for the Wheel of Games to choose next week's title, as I'm joined by my special guests, She Says and Gilly the Kid. How are you both doing? Are you both ready to see what we're playing?
Yeah, I can't wait. I'm very excited.
I'm beyond excited now at this point.
Yes, so let's go ahead and bring up our wheel, see what fate we have in store for us. We're going to go ahead and click the button, and the game that we are going to play is, as it spins... Oh boy, I think it's NES.
Ooh.
Blaster Master for NES.
Oh, thank the Lord.
All right.
I've only played the Blaster Master Zero game, so this will be interesting. And there you have it. We'll see you next time as we cover Blaster Master for the NES. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, bye.